Howdy, y'all. Welcome to our very last Campus Sustainability Month talk. We're so glad to have you here with us. Our talks are put on by our student interns. They pick a topic that they're personally interested in and then do the research and create a presentation to share with the A&M campus. So we're so glad you're here that you get to learn about a topic that's special to our students and that they find personal interest in. And we're also so happy that you're joining us for Campus Sustainability Month. Today, we'll enjoy a presentation from Hester and Cameron on the missing piece, key conservation knowledge lies within Indigenous languages. English is the dominant language of research. The wealth of wisdom and ecological understanding embedded in Indigenous languages are often lost in translation, where it might have otherwise been pivotal towards climate solution initiatives. This discussion will highlight the importance of preserving native languages that have passed down centuries of knowledge about the natural world. A little bit of space setting will be recording today, so if you're uncomfortable with that, feel free to turn off your camera. We'll be recording to post this on our YouTube channel afterwards, so you can go and review this if you'd like, or if any of your friends were unable to make it, they have a spot to watch it as well. And we'll have a live transcript. So if you want to follow along with us, you can look at the captions in your toolbar. And then we'll have a Q&A at the very end. So if you want to ask questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll save them till the end, or you can save your questions and ask them at the end. So part of Campus Sustainability Month, we do a grand prize giveaway. So one code word is equivalent to one entry into the random draw giveaway. The code words will be revealed in this presentation. They'll either be on a slide, said by a presenter, or written in the chat. So make sure you jot those down so you can get your entries in. You earn 5 code words for joining us live, but if your friends weren't able to make it, but they were really interested in the topic, they can still earn 2 code words by watching on our YouTube afterwards. You'll keep track of your code words and submit them in one email to sustainability@tamu.edu by November 2nd. And then we'll compile those, get a list together, and be able to pick the grand prize giveaway winner. So if you're wanting to look at the prize details, the additional rules, there's also a lot of different entry options. Since we're nearing the end of the month, there's not as many left, but there are still some ways where you can earn some entries, like certifying your green dorm or having a sustainable event or joining our ASA newsletter. So definitely check that out and see other ways that you can get entries. So this is what our grand prize giveaway is. We have 1 winner for tier 1, 2 for tier 2, and 5 for tier 3. Lots of really fun things that you could win. The $250 tuition scholarship is very popular, as well as the JBL speakers and the Stanley tumbler. But there's such a wide range of things, all sustainability oriented, so there's something for everyone. If you missed out, we've previously had 2 Campus Sustainability Month talks. The first being on Rivers and Rights, presented by Bailey Fay and Urisa. And this is a discussion that dives into historical Indigenous cultural practices and current disparities in resource rights. Indigenous communities played a significant role in global histories, yet lack representation and authorization in research and governance, even on their ancestral lands. So if you want to join in and watch that on YouTube, you can explore the importance of Indigenous stewardship and inclusion in climate action initiatives. And the link is on the screen there. We also had an additional talk on is climate change making us sicker? So in this presentation, this question gets answered. As the planet gets warmer and natural disasters occur more frequently with greater intensity, are disease outbreaks more common? The link for that is on the screen, and that was presented by Kaylin and Logan. Also, if you are an undergraduate student at Texas A&M and you're interested in what these students are putting on here today, like the Campus Sustainability Month talks that we have today, or tabling at Campus Sustainability Day or making intern reels, doing a bunch of fun stuff for the outreach of the office and sustainability education for Texas A&M. You should definitely consider applying for our internship program. It's on campus. We have 8 internships available every semester, and it's open to undergraduate students in all majors. We want everyone to be included, all skill sets and backgrounds at the table. You have to apply by November 10th at midnight to get your application in on time. We're super excited to review those applications and see what our next intern cohort is going to look like. So thank you so much again for joining us for Campus Sustainability Month. We're so glad you're here and we hope to see you for Campus Earth Month and Campus Sustainability Month next year. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over the presentation to our wonderful presenters.
Howdy, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our Sustainability Month talk today. My name is Hester Huynh,
And I'm Cameron Garza.
and today we'll be talking about how key conservation knowledge lies within Indigenous languages.
Our first code word is translation. So when we think about research, it's no secret that the dominant language is English. Although this language finds common ground and collaborates findings worldwide, it puts non-native English speakers at a significant disadvantage. Findings from Indigenous experts, along with non-English speaking researchers, hold vital information revolving around conservation and climate change mitigation and are likely to slip through the language gap. Indigenous refers to the peoples, communities, or culture groups who are original stewards of a particular territory and uphold unique traditions and knowledge of the place. Of the top 100 most well-regarded scientific journals, 90 are published in the United States and the UK. In some fields, roughly 98% of research is published in English. Native groups and Indigenous people hold a wealth of knowledge regarding the lands and the seas that they govern. However, centuries of abuse against Indigenous peoples by Western settlers has cultivated a deep mistrust, making knowledge difficult to integrate among the two groups. According to Laura A. Jacobs, a researcher and citizen of Muskegee Creek Nation with Choctaw heritage, it's a very one-way transactional relationship, and until we really break that transactional pathway and start being more reciprocal in the ways that we're working together, I think that mistrust is warranted. When English became the dominant language in science, education, and conservation, it didn't just create a shared platform. It also began to dismiss any non-English knowledge. In particular, the UN estimates that approximately one Indigenous language dies every 2 weeks. One of the most serious consequences of this dominance is the loss of Indigenous languages, and with them, the loss of deep ecological knowledge. Western frameworks focused on objectivity often ignore or dismiss this depth. The question we're left with now is this: how are we going to close this language gap without losing critical information? What barriers do we face that are keeping us from solving this dilemma?
Indigenous languages often encode ecological knowledge that has been passed down for centuries, including detailed inventories of species and classification systems. These languages hold practical insights into the inner workings of the planet, from knowing the best time to plant certain crops to the healing properties of medicinal plants. Brazil, which is home to the world's highest concentration of biodiversity, possesses 274 different indigenous languages, each tied to local ecological expertise. Indigenous languages contain irreplaceable environmental knowledge that could help us face today's climate crisis. One powerful example of Indigenous ecological knowledge in action comes from Papua New Guinea. Scientists from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology had been searching for the black-naped pheasant pigeon, a species that had not been seen in over 140 years and was believed to be extinct. With the help of local Indigenous communities who called the bird the owo, scientists were guided to its rediscovery in 2022. This case shows how Indigenous knowledge systems hold ecological information that science alone might overlook. In particular, language and the lived experience preserve data beyond written science.
Martin Prechtel, an Indigenous author and educator from New Mexico, puts it beautifully. He describes Indigenous speech as the speech of the ancient people where the grass grows because of the way you talk, where the wind stops and listens. When asked about his greatest influence in life, he said it was, and still is, language itself, because of the way it magically incorporates the world into a person's own body. That's what's at stake when Indigenous languages disappear. We don't just lose words, but entire ways of knowing the earth. English, as a dominant global language, tends to position itself as the language of knowledge and authority. While its intentions are not necessarily ill-willed, it often ignores or overshadows other ways of understanding life. So, what if English isn't the only language that holds knowledge? What if other languages, Indigenous languages, carry truths that English cannot express? In these languages, the earth facilitates the connection between language, culture, and nature.
The Marshall Islands are a chain of islands and atolls in the central Pacific Ocean. To the Marshallese, climate change is a familiar, lived reality. They face rising sea levels and land erosion, saltwater intrusion contaminating freshwater, and their fishing ecosystems, which are crucial to their economic well-being, are deteriorating. Efforts to translate climate change into Marshallese, the native language of the Marshall Islands, have led to mixed results. They do use English loanwords like climate change, global warming, and greenhouse effect in local speech. But the term most often used is oktak and mijatoto, which literally translates into the change or difference of meatoto. This term extends far beyond the English term of climate. It does not distinguish between weather and climate and may even refer to environmental changes in rainfall or tides, solar eclipses, or even shifts in people's behavior or social cohesion. In the Marshallese worldview, environmental and social change are inseparable. The term Meja naturally unites social, cultural, and environmental phenomena. So translating climate as a purely physical phenomenon is a foreign concept to the speakers of Marshallese. Marshallese communities face severe ecological decline and displacement as a result of climate change. Yet English-dominant legal and scientific systems limit Indigenous voices in climate discourse. It is crucial to allow the voice of those impacted by climate change to be heard in international discussions. But it's extremely difficult because they must follow these complex legal and scientific discussions in their third or fourth languages.
Western conservation strategies sometimes fail in places where land requires local knowledge. When Indigenous peoples are pressured to assimilate, to learn only in English, or to abandon their own traditions, they're not just losing language. They're losing connection to identity, to ancestors, to the land, and to each other. In her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Kimmerer compares the loss of Indigenous language to that of when someone tells a joke and no one else understands it. This puts into perspective how crucial the Indigenous perspective and language of the world is to science and conservation knowledge. Without it, it's nearly impossible to grasp the bigger picture. If we want truly sustainable conservation, we have to stop suppressing the voices and the languages that have kept ecosystems in balance for centuries.
So navigating the climate and biodiversity crises requires the integration of Indigenous knowledge. A study done by Amano et al. Found that when non-English studies are included in biodiversity research, the number of species covered jumps from 5% to 32%, and geographic coverage doubles, going from 12% to 25%. Additionally, 1/3 of all studies on biodiversity conservation are not written in English, meaning that there's a large evidence gap in the regions facing the most pressing biodiversity loss, including Southeast Asia, tropical Africa, and Latin America. True climate action means moving towards the integration of Indigenous knowledge, including non-English research, and recognizing that the potential solutions aren't missing. They're just unheard.
So, how do we begin to bridge the gap between dominant English-speaking conservation science and the under-recognized knowledge held within Indigenous languages? There are several differences between Western and Indigenous science. However, the two can blend together to make progress if there are groups or people to facilitate the convergence of the two. Anthropologist and environmental scientist Gonzalo Oviedo expands on the idea well and concludes, "We need healing processes within societies so that cultures can speak to each other on equal footing, which unfortunately isn't the case in many places today." The International Union for Conservation of Nature has proposed several key actions to conserve Indigenous languages that are threatened. First, we need to center Indigenous voices. The key to facilitate evidence-based conservation around the world and to overcome the lack of local, context-dependent evidence is to include non-English language science. We need to advocate the integration of non-English languages in academia and conservation. Overall, climate change is a global crisis that requires action from all groups, and while many Indigenous communities experience the impacts of the crisis, an English-dominant legal and scientific world makes it difficult for them to contribute to the conversation. We must also actively protect and revitalize Indigenous languages. This means funding language schools, supporting translation efforts, and treating these languages not as artifacts, but as living systems of knowledge. Collaborating with organizations like the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, ensures Indigenous knowledge is valued equally alongside scientific research. And finally, we must reanalyze what truly counts as knowledge. Traditions, ceremony, storytelling, and spirituality with the land hold real ecological insight. These ways of life have sustained ecosystems for generations, so why ignore them now? And your last code word is preservation. Thank you guys so much for coming to our presentation. Here are our sources, and we'll now be taking any questions either in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask.
Thank you guys. That was a wonderful presentation. We already have one question in the chat. Why did you focus on international Indigenous communities and not talk about the tribes in the United States?
Okay, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking. I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are a lot of Indigenous communities in the US that are threatened as well. And our first Campus Sustainability Month talk, which covered rivers and rights, in particular the Colorado River, Indigenous tribes focused more on that. And so we thought it was important to cover how there's thousands of Indigenous languages globally that were also threatened. So we wanted to be able to cover both the US stuff and global Indigenous languages. Thank you.
Okay, next question. Is there a specific piece of Indigenous knowledge that you learned about in your research that surprised you?
Actually there was. So I actually learned that there is a word, I think it's called Potawatomi or something, but it actually means the physical act of a mushroom coming up from the ground. And it's a word that we don't have in English, or we don't have a word that's used to describe that type of thing in English. So I thought that was really cool and a piece of knowledge that I didn't know of.
Hester, did you also want to answer that question? Or do we want to move on to the next?
Um, I think that looking at the Marshall Islands case study really surprised me because they are extremely familiar with the concept of climate change and they're affected by it every day, but they don't have a comprehensive word for it from the English perspective.
Next question. How does bias affect this topic, personal or other?
I think bias can affect the topic because what we're all used to in this like westernized society is the research that we know of, and all of that is usually standardized in English. So there's definitely that bias because everything that we learn is in English, but what we don't know and what we should consider is the fact that there's lots of knowledge lost within other Indigenous languages and facts that we may not even know of and would be extremely useful in knowing for lots of different topics.
Yeah, I think Cameron put that really well. There's a lot of information in Indigenous languages and even non-English languages that we just don't have access to. So thank you.
I have a
So,
question. I'll
yes,
just
go
ask
ahead.
one. Um, is this concept widely accepted within the scientific community, or is this something that is relatively new and being introduced?
I would have to do more research on that, but I do think that scientifically at least it's pretty accepted. It's just the fact that when scientists from across the world get together and make these types of decisions or like publish their works, lots of times everyone can only collaborate on the English, I guess, findings of things because they can't understand the indigenous languages of the people who come and bring, I guess, pieces of evidence from their research, from their indigenous, I guess, communities. But so I don't know if that really answered the question, but
It does. It sounds like it's not a priority.
right, right.
Yeah, I would definitely have to do more research as well, but from based on the studies that we read, there's been an increasing number of studies, so there's more awareness around this topic in the past decade or so.
Thank you.
So, do we have any other questions?
Are there next steps in trying to make this a priority? I think you touched on that a little bit, but just curious if you want to expand on that.
Yes, so in our last slide, we did kind of touch on that, but like Cameron mentioned, there is an organization um, called the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and they're having like a congress, like a conference on it, sorry, in Dubai this month to discuss it. So there's definitely steps being taken on like an international level to discuss the preservation of indigenous languages.
And especially because these organizations are nationally and globally recognized, I think as long as we're making more of an effort and there's more of a push towards a focus and prioritization of this topic, then more people will be aware of it. And that way, more people can contribute to, like I said earlier, funding language schools or supporting those translation efforts and treating the languages as systems of knowledge. So yeah, I just think as long as there's more of a push towards it, there's already a spotlight on a lot of these organizations. So I think that would be extremely beneficial.
Next question. Do you know of any current policy that is being pushed to improve on inclusive languages being put into place?
I personally don't know of a specific policy, but I don't know if Hester had done research on that.
Um, yeah, I think we'd have to do a bit more research to see if any current policies are in place, but I'm not aware of any.
If it hasn't already been done, though, I think that would be a really good idea and a good first.
For sure. I have a personal question. So what inspired y'all to focus on this topic?
Okay, during our initial brainstorming for our topics and looking through like the news sources that were popping up. I think Cameron and I both found one article that was um, titled "The Climate and Biodiversity Knowledge We Lose When Everything's in English" um, in Inside Climate News, and it was just a really informative um, article that I found super interesting, um, that inspired us to explore ways that this issue started and how it could be addressed in the future.
Yeah, it definitely stood out to me as well and kind of sparked my interest to want to do further research on it. Because I think it's super, I don't know, interesting that there's tons of knowledge about things that we don't even know of, or we didn't even know that there could be extra or additional knowledge on topics. So, yeah.
I think we have time for one or two more questions if anyone has any.
No question, but I'd like to say that was a very, really nice presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I want to emphasize the last point. Beautiful presentation, such wonderful information, and such a good range of sources to learn from. Thank you all for joining us today and getting to learn a bit more about a very specific niche within sustainability that I think we should all be more aware of. And so I'm very thankful that Cameron and Hester did all the work to bring this to us today. Also, thank you everyone for joining. We're so glad you joined us for Campus Sustainability Month. This is our last talk, but just a reminder that you can revisit our previous talks as well as this talk on our YouTube channel. Be sure you follow us at Sustainable TAMU to get all that information and additional ways to get involved with us. I hope everyone has a beautiful rest of their day. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Thank you.